Okay, hello and welcome back to the channel. It's me, Gooder, again, back with Dan, who I don't know if he's still lost about Lost.
I still think I'm still fairly lost about Lost and intrigued as to where it's going.
So we thought we would do a season one kind of review now that we've got to the end of that before we move forward and sort of talk about perhaps where you've kind of changed your mind on characters, how you reacted to people. See if we can get you to commit to sort of guessing where you think some of the storylines and mysteries are heading. And then, we can come back to these in quite a few episodes' time and see whether you were right or not.
Make me make a few predictions. That should be entertaining.
Yes, so that was season one. So I thought probably a good point to do quickly first is kind of talk through a few of the characters.
Yep.
I think a good place to start is Sawyer, because I know at the start you very much did not like Sawyer and kind of thought he was a bit one-dimensional and a bit kind of just irritating. So, did that change?
Yeah, I think there's it's a character that has generally grown in the show and therefore to me as an audience member. I mean, I don't think I was in any way wrong to dislike him at the beginning. And while I think there's two aspects to it. There's the fact that you learnt more about him, so he was more interesting, which is one bit. But I think the fundamental thing that had to change was just his attitude towards the rest of the group, which I think was my biggest thing that I complained about, was like, this type of person could not be acting this way around this in this sort of situation. It just wouldn't work. And sure enough, 10 or 15 episodes down the line, his attitude did change. He became much more reluctantly cooperative, I think is probably how I'd describe it. So he sort of kept his sort of little digs at people, but at the same time, he's not now crossing over the line every single time in terms of the realms of what is a reasonable position to be adopting.
Yeah. It's interesting because he kind of, I think it's when we have the episode with the golf in, that's when we first really see him kind of
start to try and change,
kind of engage with people a little bit more. But I think you're right. He still kind of keeps himself to himself largely from what we see, but he's a bit more. And I think one of the ways you can see that is quite a few of the episodes at the start of the season have an element where somebody needs something and Sawyer's got it because he's hoarding everything. And he kind of really makes people
jump through a lot of
hoops to get stuff. And then later episodes, you have things like Hurley's just like, I need to manifest. We can just skip to the end and you can just give it. And Sawyer just gives it to him rather than actually, bothering to.
Yeah, and you actually sort of see him sort of move from being completely selfish about him to actually doing things that are useful for the group. Particularly with when you sort of have the last couple of episodes where it's the sort of building of the raft and he's actually pitching in and doing useful things. And he's kind of the hero on the raft. We went in a couple of occasions where he's the one who goes and gets the rudder that falls off. He goes for the gun in terms of trying to protect Walt and the rest of them and gets shot in the process. He's definitely a character that I think evolved in a way that you kind of think, that in my mind makes sense. Because if we accept what he was like at the very beginning, I kind of feel that it's a natural evolution for that character to have had to manage to adjust his attitude.
Yeah, and I think going into like the next season, we've got that kind of twist on the fact that he's become more cooperative, particularly in this final moments where like he has sort of dived in to save the rudder or whatever, but then Michael has that conversation with him where Michael's like, are you trying to kill yourself? And basically the implication is, Sawyer has got to a point where he doesn't really
I think
he's not necessarily trying to actively kill himself, but he doesn't care whether he survives or not.
Well, that's it. And I think that's actually it's not like you've taken a character that at the very beginning was one thing and by the end of the season was completely different. You've kind of worked out, these are the underlying reasons, and the reason why he was being a complete the reading of it is the reason why you think he was a complete and utter jerk at the beginning was because he was in this self-destructive, I hate myself, and therefore I'm going to give this persona around everyone. And that's still there, just it's been realized in a very different way in terms of that.
You have to kind of remember at the start, he's on a journey home from having just been tricked into murdering somebody.
Yeah.
Which is quite a dark place.
Yeah. And it's good that you kind of found that out, and that's why the character grows into something that works, when initially it was like, we don't understand any rationale behind this. It doesn't work on a longer term basis. And so they did the two things that you needed, which was the background and the understanding of, okay, well, I can understand why he's in a dark place. And at the same time, giving enough hints that he's not like a fully evil person, that, you know, he walks out in the flashback when he discovers that they've got a kid. You sort of have the tragic backstory and all the bits and pieces like that, the sort of reluctance to go through actually killing the person. And then you've got the evolution of him. Well, this can't persist on the island because he's just getting beaten up by people, having his stuff stolen, and you know, all the other bits and pieces. So,
yeah, yes, I think it's, yeah, I guess it kind of harks back to what I've said before about, like, I think people forget that Lost has a lot of strong character development stuff in it. And I think that's a sign of it. The fact that you kind of started off not liking him, and then by the end you're kind of like, oh, I can understand, like, this character now. So what did you make, moving on to like his fellow, I guess, like boat friends? Michael and Walt.
So Michael and Walt are probably the ones that there are a couple of characters that I don't think my view of them in terms of how much I like them or not has changed particularly. I've never really perceived them as particularly strong / important characters in the season so far. Kind of the only things that's really been going on with them is the sort of mystery around Walt and him possibly being special. But it's almost like it's the Walt's abilities are the interesting bit, rather than Walt as a character is an interesting thing. And the issue with Michael effectively as a character is really there to just kind of support the Walt character and have this father-son dynamic going on. And all of that's fairly consistent throughout. So I don't think, in my mind, that's evolved too much. I mean, you've learned a little bit about the backstory as to why they are that way, but you haven't seen any great changes other than, they've gotten a little bit closer. And you had that sort of slight change towards the end where they sort of start to get working together. But yeah, in terms of characters, they're kind of, in my mind, just not important as much as characters. They're sort of more sort of facilitating other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I think when you look at them, what I think is quite interesting for me is they're kind of a microcosm of two of the big themes that run through, like, the whole show as well as just this season. Because Walt represents that kind of paranormal aspect, and he's one of the first indications we get, really, of there is legitimately something that cannot be explained away by science kind of going on. And then their whole relationship is fathers and son
daddy issues going on. And that in terms of their function and their on the show and their expounding on the themes and all of that, they work perfectly well. But just in terms of interesting characters, their character side of things is reduced because of their kind of role as doing these other things. And I think that's the reason why I would say that as a set of characters, my opinion hasn't changed, because
you pretty much get the setup for them, like you say, at the start. And they don't really deviate from that much, apart from their kind of relationship with each other kind of does get better. The final boat escapee as Jin, but I think it's probably worth considering Jin in conjunction with Sun.
Well, I probably wouldn't associate necessarily. Well, that's an interesting point. Jin and Sun, do I view them as the same or not? So I think the thing about Jin and Sun is their whole stick. What is they're kind of the characters that are a bit of a mystery. Now, all of the characters have a bit of a mystery about them, but they sort of emphasize it because of the whole language barrier bit. You've got them completely separated for the group for a big section of the beginning of the season where you don't really know too much about them and they're not really that important. They're just sort of there. And it's only like through when Sun reveals that she speaks English and you've got Jin attacking Michael, that you know there's bits and pieces going on in their past and behind them. But yeah, it's kind of difficult because I think Jin is still very much a bigger mystery to me than Sun is. But in part that's because they've maintained the language barrier around Jin.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what's good about them is that you've got this very good, don't know how to describe it, but sort of love relationship aspect going on between the two of them because they're the only characters in a proper relationship. That they're in a relationship when they arrived on the island. They're just about in a relationship still when Jin goes off on the raft. So ignoring Shannon, Saeed, which sort of hook up, and maybe there's a little bit of something going on with Kate and a few others, and Charlie and Claire, but they're the pair of characters that are basically doing this.
Yeah, they're the one established.
Yeah,
because we learned that. Well, kind of the progression is when we first sort of meet them. Jin appears to be as very domineering.
Yeah.
Kind of husband, and Sun's very submissive. And then we kind of find out more about kind of their role. Essentially, their roles have reversed from where they started when we see them.
Yeah.
In the flashbacks, and we kind of learn that their marriage was under strain, and it's kind of this, various different reasons. And I think the main character arc for the two of them is probably centered around Jin, actually, where he kind of by the finale, he's kind of finally frees himself of kind of feeling the obligation to Sun's father.
Yeah. And I think I like the arc of those two, and like the relationship arc about how you've got this couple that seem very close, but with Jin domineering, and then you learn about they were very close, but actually they drifted apart. But now because of the language barrier, they're sort of kind of stuck together again, and you've got them fighting, breaking up, kind of then coming back together and sort of realizing their love for each other. So I like that in terms of the way that all panned out. I think from my side of things, the couple of interesting things about it is that Jin is virtually defined by his relationship to Sun. And in part that's because you've got this language barrier that literally everything that you see him doing on the island and even in the flashbacks is basically to do with his relationship to Sun in some way, shape or form. While Sun, I think, has got more other things going on in that Sun does, because she can interact with other people, she starts developing a niche for herself, being almost like Jack's nurse or helper, doing all the plants, bits and pieces. She's very much in the flashbacks, kind of the one that's trying to introduce the changes. She's the one who tries to makes the effort for them to reconcile on the island as well. So yeah, I think Sun is a more interesting character at the moment than Jin, but I think Jin's got a lot of potential, if that makes sense. In that, I think at some point, they're hinting at it now that they're going to break away that language barrier. I'm assuming that by season 2.5, 3, he's going to magically speak perfect English, and
not the gift of the island, maybe.
Yeah. Because that it seems a big weakness at the moment, and he'll actually be able to develop into something that isn't just purely defined by his relationship to Sun.
Yeah. And yeah, because I think you definitely see Jin starting to come into his own a little bit more in the last kind of handful of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally just the last handful, though. And it's interesting because in that last handful, it's sort of, it's where he's starting to learn to speak some words of English. It's with the ones where he's starting to actually have interactions back and forth with Michael, and doing something that isn't purely about him and Sun, because before it was like he would catch fish for them and then exchange the fish for the things they need. So it was all purely.
Yeah, I think, and then the last kind of characters I've paired together for this, Shannon and Boone. Obviously, we've ragged on Boone a few times.
Boone, well, my view of Boone has improved after they've killed him off. So
yay!
He will no longer be causing negatives.
Poor Boone.
Shannon's kind of an interesting character. Again, I wouldn't say my opinion of her has materially changed. She has clearly grown a bit as a result of being on the island, and it'll be interesting to see, I think, what they do with her in season 2, because it's kind of like they've started the process of her evolving as a character, but it hasn't really. They've effectively put all of the obstacles and adversities to her right towards the end of season 1, whereby now she's having to rest up to the fact that Boone's dead. She's in love with Sayid, but Sayid isn't going to be manipulated like all the other men in her life. She's got Vincent to look after. She tried to kill Locke. Was Locke, yeah. But was stopped from doing it by Sayid. So there's a whole load of ingredients that she could be evolving in a positive way. But I don't think that's quite come to fruition yet. So I think season 2 will probably see her changing quite a bit as a character as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a lot of change, I think, in her that you can see. And I think, to be fair, she is actually the only character where we don't really have a dedicated flashback on.
Yeah.
Because what we do see is the main flashback we get around those characters is from Boone's perspective. So I think we mentioned it the other week, the only bit of flashback we get from her perspective is literally in like the finale, and it's a really short,
really small bit with Sayid and his luggage. And I think that's the thing, that in order for her, well, not necessarily the only way of doing it, but the way they've done it is that her character was tied to Boone, and she kind of relied on Boone as being, Boone will get me out of trouble. Boone will sort the other bits out. I can manipulate Boone into doing these bits and pieces. And so killing off Boone, while, obviously has major positives for the show in general, puts her in a position, I need to now change my life view because Boone is literally no longer there to bail me out. So
yeah, and Boone just kind of goes from being a bit useless at saving people to being like Locke's kind of lackey. Yeah. There's not a lot of interest there, really. Either.
No, there's not a lot you can really say about Boone.
Kind of the only real hook you have on him is the fact that he was in love with his stepsister.
Yeah.
Which just is a bit annoying, really, the way it gets played out, because it just means he's just portrayed as the kind of overprotective, grumpy.
Yeah, and it's kind of a difficult one in terms of, you're seeing him do all of these things that are possibly, not what unexpected for like an older brother, younger sister type relationship. But the fact you've got this extra element to it, and the fact that she reciprocates it and sort of exploits it, it's a little bit creepy. It's a little bit sort of,
because again, it's like the bit about it that is the most intriguing is actually about Shannon, because you kind of wonder, does she reciprocate? Like, is that genuine, or is that her
just manipulating
him again?
Yeah. and I guess the one unfortunate thing is that, like, the arc with him and Locke, while he was basically Locke's lackey, the one thing that was coming out of that was him not breaking up with, but giving up on his fascination with Shannon and trying to do something else. But then they killed him off, so nothing ever really came to that. So
he became our first warning sign that
yeah,
characters who feature in the titles may not survive.
Yeah.
Next, I think, again, another one of the kind of more minor characters who doesn't have a lot of development themselves is, although there's some interesting small things, is the only Australian on the Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire unfortunately has not. Well, Claire unfortunately has been the damsel in distress type character, unfortunately, and there's little evolution from that so far. There's a few, there's some interesting bits and pieces that you learn from the flashbacks, and she's clearly a nice character, but you're not ever going to be that intrigued by her given what's happened so far.
It's one of those kind of unfortunate characters in drama, in fiction.
Yeah.
If she was a real life person that you knew, she'd be lovely, and you think she was great. But in a drama, because she's not that interesting, she kind of fades into the background. But she's clearly like a super friendly person.
Yeah, and that's the thing. She's very likable as a character. She hasn't evolved much over the season, but her kind of role that she's had has not been to do that. I mean, all that's really happened is she's had her kid, and again, like, as in drama, you are unfortunately defined by certain things, and she's defined as, she's the pregnant one, she's the one who's got kidnapped, she's the one who's gone into labour, she's the one who's got the baby to look after.
Almost in a way, she plays. She's more important in terms of Charlie than she is in terms of herself.
Yes, yeah, and as a mechanism for. Are the others after her child and the other bits and pieces associated with that, and as an additional vessel about the supernatural, about how she ended up on the plane and all this sort of thing.
So yeah, I mean, let's move on to Charlie.
Charlie, okay.
Characters who displays, kind of a bigger shift.
Yeah, I mean, I like the character of Charlie now, and I'm pretty sure that if I went and played back our pilot review. I was sort of ragging on Charlie being the sort of fairly stereotypical drug addict musician person. And he's definitely evolved as a character over the space of time. He's become a lot more likable and a bit less comic relief. But I think it's very believable. So, like, the thing about Charlie is clearly that, it's a good job he's not a person I know, so I'll just, it sounds like he's ragging on him, but clearly internally he's a very weak character.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And that's, I think, eminently believable in terms of what you saw in flashbacks. It's like that's the sort of character who does become an addict if exposed to the wrong circumstances. Yeah. And he's not got away from that weakness. He's just sort of defeated one gremlin. But you still see the aspects of that in him when he's like, "Oh, I need a gun," and he's not like he's not internally a very strong character. He's sort of doing desperation and need.
What it is, he needs, as a character, he needs validation from other people a lot.
Yeah,
and I think at the start, that's kind of, he looks for that by kind of being the kind of jokey, happy-go-lucky character. He's to everybody. He's like, "Oh, do you know my band? Like, you must know my band," because he's looking for that validation. And then there's the episode with the cave in where he gets trapped in with Jack, and even then he's kind of looking for the validation because he's like, "I tried to save you, but I failed. I'm rubbish."
Yeah.
And Jack actually does the kind of, the fact that you even tried is a sign. And then he starts to get or feel like he's getting more of that from like the dynamic he starts to get with Claire.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's the big kind of barrier thrown onto that, or the big stop thrown on that, where he feels like he's failed when Claire gets
kidnapped, Ethan.
So I think kind of his response to that obviously is quite extreme, quite violent, where he guns down, Ethan.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, as the season goes on, you can see he kind of starts to believe in himself a bit more, like genuinely, rather than needing other people to tell him.
Yeah. And I think that like I say, what I like about what Lost has done with the characters so far is it feels all very real and realistic. Like you could see, once you start to learn about the characters, first of all, you learn why they're in the situation they are, or the character they are at the very beginning, and you go, oh yeah, that makes sense given the backstory. And then while there's an evolution of the character, the core traits are still there, and things externally have caused them to change in terms of what their character now is. For Charlie, it predominantly was the interactions with Claire, who is someone who he was interacting with not from the position of, oh, you're a famous Drive Shaft band member, which I think is crucial, because previously that was his kind of crux, that this is the only thing that makes me valid to you, while having the start of a relationship which is completely detached from that. The fact that he's managed to defeat the drug bit, which was something he kind of had to do anyway, because he had, while he was, people like Locke forcing him down that path, again, that gave him the opportunity to grow and focus on other things and sort of think about that. So yeah, he's definitely developed into a character I liked. I watched the Lord of the Rings last night, and I was like, oh, look, there's Charlie. So he's gone from Hobbit that isn't Frodo to
You've gone from going, oh look, it's Hobbit that's not Frodo, to oh, it's Charlie. I think I primarily see Dominic Monaghan. I primarily see him as Charlie when I see him pop up and things. I think, and then if we move on to kind of the other character who started out as kind of a comic relief type character, Hurley.
Yeah. Hurley still is predominantly comic relief. And to be fair, I don't think he was ever like completely over the top comic relief. Like I think this sort of level of comic relief has stayed relatively consistent throughout. It's just that you've seen a bit more of him now that the season's progressed. He's still a bit of a mystery to me, I would say, in that at the moment, most of the character stuff that we've learnt about is again not linked to him as a character, but linked to his connection to the numbers. That's his thing. And in a similar way to we sort of talked about some of the other characters, as a character itself, it therefore suffers from the fact that he's just got like the focus is more about, oh, he knows about the numbers, but no one else knows about the numbers. He's got this obsession about the luck aspect to the numbers, and all of the things that have sort of happened to him that are leading up to it have been about the numbers rather than being about him. You could basically take the character of Hurley, stick someone else into that role, and it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference to the show. And I think that's where, as a character, it unfortunately suffers. But he's done some, he's quite a likable character. He's sort of found his bits and pieces in terms of like he built the golf course. He's found there's been areas where he's been a lot stronger than you'd expect him to be.
Yeah, because he kind of builds the golf course. He's the one that
Danielle,
the census.
Yeah.
Things like that. I think the one possible thing that he's not had a lot of kind of depth added to him, because like you say, a lot of what we know is kind of his relationship to the numbers, and he's like the one character where kind of a more paranormal aspect of what's going on is kind of driving him as a character rather than the other way around.
And because there's clearly some interesting stuff about him that we haven't yet seen, because like the flashbacks have basically gone back to him winning the lottery, and all of that flashback sequence was basically just about the numbers and like him trying to solve the mystery of the numbers, which was the focus of those flashbacks. You didn't really learn much about him, But there's clearly some bits that are sort of hinted at, like the fact that he was in a mental institution of some
Yes, yeah. So we get, I was going to say, we get little bits like that where we kind of, but we've not had filled in yet.
So you kind of think that hopefully as a character, he's not going to just be all about the numbers and nothing else is going to happen with it. Because again, I think he falls in a similar category to Claire in that, he seems like, he'd be a nice guy to hang out with. Or not,
yeah.
But in terms of what's going on, in terms of plot and character development, the writers are basically using him predominantly as this mechanism to deal with the numbers rather than talk about him.
It's that thing, isn't it, where Hurley and Claire seem like nice people, but dramatically they don't so far have enough character defects to make them that interesting. So we're pretty much now, I think, moving into what I'd call kind of the big hitter
categories
for the characters. So I think first up here we've got Saeed.
Okay, yeah. How has my view of Saeed changed? I think my view of Saeed has been a bit weird in that I would say my opinion of him at the beginning is very similar to my opinion at the end, but I had a weird sort of in the middle because I think I definitely didn't like the kind of out of the blue realization, he's an expert torturer and all this sort of bits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a period where he was like this quite nice, helpful character, which was exactly where he ended up with at the end. But you just had this weird little arc in the middle, which, stepping back to look at the whole season, that actually worked quite well because he clearly had this secret past. It actually makes a lot of sense in terms of the other stuff you find out, like the really like the actual flashbacks of him doing the torturing bit was kind of not particularly exciting, but then you learn, he had to work for the CIA and betrayed his friend in order to do the greater good and all these sort of bits and pieces. That was quite an interesting storyline. And he had I'm going to wander off and find myself again, go walk about. And then he interacts with Danielle and all the other bits and pieces. So it's kind of weird in that I wouldn't say there was much in the way of character development. It's more like character realization. Like you learn a lot about him over the course of the season. But as a character, I don't think he's fundamentally changed over the course of the season.
I think, effectively what you get is a smaller, kind of compacted version of what the character has gone through. So the character clearly has this path where he's found himself being the torturer.
Yeah.
He's kind of hated himself for that. Then he's kind of found redemption through Nadia, like this woman, and he's kind of worked to make himself a better man. And then you kind of have like almost on the island, you kind of almost have a loop where he goes back through that again, where he kind of finds himself put in that position of being the torturer, hates himself.
Yeah.
Kind of refined, like, what he thinks is good about himself.
Yeah. So I think he's definitely an interesting character. But if we're talking about evolution, I think it is that he just has that same cycle that he's already had. Yeah. And so as a character, while he changes over the course of the season, he's effectively back to where he was at the beginning of the season, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I guess the one thing that genuinely changes is he moves on from Nadia. We don't at this stage know what has happened. Really. All we know is that he was trying to find her, but we don't know why.
Yeah.
And then we've got, I guess, kind of what I consider to be the central three, pretty much.
Jack, Kate, and Locke.
Jack, Kate, and Locke. So let's go with Kate next.
So, well, what I would say about the main three, just as a sort of side point, is that in the main three, I'd say Jack and Kate are probably the two characters where my view of them has probably lessened over the season. That's probably the only two.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there early. So Kate's like a bit of an enigma. Like she was the classic, like in the pilot and the first episode or so, she was the sort of portrayed as this sort of classic female sidekick to Jack the hero.
Yeah.
She's partially the heroine, partially the potential love interest, but the very, very stereotypical.
Yeah, I think it's one of the areas where you can definitely tell the pilot hadn't quite found what it was going for yet, because you have the sequence in the pilot where she kind of does the doe eyes at Jack when she sees him, like with his shirt off or whatever, and it's like, and then you get to the end of the season, you're like, that just does not fit for who she is.
And I think that's possibly a problem in terms of the sort of view of the character, that they sort of didn't get it right, maybe first of all. And it's weird because I think the way she evolved initially was intriguing and interesting, where you're like, okay, she's got some kind of dark past and all this sort of stuff going on. But to my mind, like it's almost like they've pushed it slightly too far, possibly too quickly. I don't know why, but like the sort of more extreme measures that she's sort of doing towards the end, like trying to, because she ends up poisoning Michael by mistake and all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, she kind of uses Sun
to do
that.
And I think the problem that you've got with that character towards the end, in terms of me liking her as a character, and that's not, just to clarify that she's still a very good character and it's very interesting.
Yeah, the difference between like an interesting character to watch and one that you actually kind of are on the side of.
Yeah. You've sort of seen all of these really extreme things that she's done, both in the past and to some extent on the island. And she keeps revealing sort of hidden talents and hidden abilities. The difficulty that you've got is that's been stretching on so long, and there's something dark about her nudges have just been going on, and you're like, you're at the stage at the moment where I just don't trust Kate. If that makes and I think there was probably like, okay, pilot, she was way too stereotypical, but there would be a point sort of halfway through the season where she was an interesting but still trustworthy character, but at the moment, she's been on a sort of a bit of a downhill from my perspective in terms of not.
Yes, yeah. She starts out very much like on the side of like Jack and trying to get them off the island and all of that. And then, she does kind of, as the season goes on, starts playing for her own kind of agenda rather than a group one. And that's like you say, is kind of encapsulated by her attempt to get onto the boat. And we kind of realize that's all based around the fact that she thinks that's her only chance of
escaping. And so I think there's clearly still a lot to come from Kate, but at the moment I think sort of peak Kate would have been sort of halfway through the season, and now she's sort of becoming a bit more I don't like her.
Not so sure. And I think a lot of the show for me as well is a lot of it is kind of her interactions to Jack, and we can move on to Jack as well, because you kind of have that kind of starts off quite flirty, and then they kind of both back off for different reasons because they've got like their own stuff going on. And I think one of the really kind of interesting moments in the finale is the bit where she's determined that she wants to carry some of this dynamite. They do the pulling of the straws, so she thinks she's got it, but Jack has swapped it out because Jack is
doing his hero thing,
doing his thing where he doesn't want her to be in danger. And then they have like the little interaction about it where she kind of asks him about it, and then he's just like, I made a choice, get over it. So they have I think they have an interesting like dynamic, and by the time you kind of add Sawyer kind of into it a little bit, it's this interesting, it's not quite I wouldn't call it a love triangle, but it's like this interesting
I mean, I think that
an interesting something triangle.
I think that particular triangle is one of the more interesting character dynamics in the show, is the Kate, Jack, Sawyer dynamic, because they are like, you could kind of view it as Jack is one extreme, Sawyer is another extreme, and Kate seems to be able to sort of flick between the two of them, like extremes
Yeah,
herself. She sometimes she's forming the middle ground between them. Sometimes she's very much going, I'm just as manipulative and as Sawyer is, so I'm going to pair up with Sawyer for this thing. And then other times she's like, I'm just as heroic as Jack is. So yeah, she's very much a chameleon of a character, and I think that's part of the issue at the moment, that she's a little bit too much of a chameleon for me to trust her. But
well, but it makes sense because this is somebody who's spent years having multiple different names, and
I think that's it. That it's predominantly that it's the underlying, like Sawyer war and to some extent wears his selfishness and it all being about himself on his sleeve. You get that straight away. Well, with Kate, I feel that you're like not really sure, and that's where you sort of got this. She seems to be doing all these good things at the moment, but I've just got this inkling that if something comes up that results in her escaping, she'll kill us all just to achieve it.
Yeah, if you kind of reduced it down to kind of almost like Saturday morning cartoon style narratives, like Sawyer would be the cackling, like out in the open, obvious villain.
Yeah.
Whereas Kate would be the kind of mysterious, figure behind the scenes who's orchestrating.
Yeah.
And then obviously we mentioned Jack there. So Jack is our introduction to the whole show because he's the
Jack's
first.
introduction to the whole show. He's comes in as he's the hero character. He comes in as the leader of the group. They do some good things because they establish that he's got flaws. They sort of do some bits and pieces in terms of some reluctance to lead and the reluctance to be that leader character.
That's one of my favorite things about him, I think, is although it kind of the pilot sets him up as the clear, obvious hero lead, you do constantly have this kind of running thing of he doesn't want to be like the leader, and he says it a few times, and then he kind of accepts it as we move into towards the end of the series. But I really like that moment where he's like, where he kind of says, everybody wants me to make the decisions, but then when I make a decision, everybody shouts at me. And he kind of, he has that kind of realization, and then by the end, I think that explains why largely kind of things like the decision he makes with the dynamite, he's like, well, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah,
I'm not going to tell anybody because everybody will just shout at me anyway. So
yeah, I think the bits that I haven't liked about like Jack's evolution, or it's not even evolution, but the bits of the character you sort of discover are the bits where he goes away from his like man of science, man of logic elements to it. And we've seen that a few times now where he ends up like flying completely off the handle and just going full red jet on certain bits and pieces. And we haven't really seen like an underlying reason for that necessarily. But yeah, it's those aspects to his character that I think we've had a few bits and bobs on that just don't quite seem to fit in my mind. Like there was the whole like when he attacks Locke and blames Locke for Boone dying, just seemed a bit over the top. There's the bits and pieces where he goes after Ethan and so on. But again, he just seems he's had these various moments where he's just sort of going off on one, which don't quite seem to fit with the rest of his character. And I've not yet because we haven't yet had an explanation or a sort of reasoning behind it, and we haven't had enough of it that it's like a core character trait. It doesn't sit well with me as part of his actual character, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for me, the way I kind of understand it, I think Jack just does not deal with failure well, and I think that's what drives that behavior a lot of the time. Because with Ethan, it's the failure of keeping everybody safe. So he's like, right, I must put that right. I can't let myself fail there. With the blaming Locke for Boone's death, it's the kind of, he's failed to keep this person alive. You get a brief flash of it around the Marshal near the start of the series where he suddenly runs into the tent to see what's happening and he's ready to be like, but he kind of calms down again when it becomes clear the Marshal is just dying slower. So So that's the way I kind of interpret it. Like he obviously has this really weird, hyper pressurized kind of relationship with his father. So I think that the way I read it is there's been a lot of pressure coming down on him to succeed from his dad, because we have that early scene where his dad's basically sort of trying to be nice but doing it in a bad way, where he's like telling Jack, "You'll never be good enough to do this."
Yeah.
So I think that's where these kind of outbursts come from. It's this kind of really instilled kind of like, I can't fail, and when he does fail, he can't cope with it.
Yeah, I think that you're probably right, but certainly, all I can do is, from my perspective, is that it's not yet fitted into my mind of his character, and that might be something that over time, and a bit of it will be the fact that he's set up as the hero character, and there's certain bits and pieces that you sort of accept that the hero character has flaws. He's got these sort of bits and pieces in his past, but these sort of big emotional outbursts, especially when you've got this big theme running through about like logic versus man of science versus man of faith and all the other bits and pieces, that you kind of want him to be this logical rock, to at least to some extent, and you can veer away from it, but to a bit. But these have been such big extreme swings that
I mean, I do kind of agree. Like his reaction on to Locke over Boone's death does seem a bit extreme. I think the bit that kind of makes more sense for me in his reaction is the bit where Shannon's got the gun on Locke, and she pulls the trigger basically, and like it's Saeed who dives to kind of push her at the last moment, but Jack just kind of stands there and he's prepared to let that happen. I think that makes more sense than him kind of actively coming for Locke, that he would stand by and just be like.
And I think that part of it is that you have all of that, like a big outburst, and you have Jack effectively, physically trying to, probably not quite trying to kill him, but physically beating Locke.
Yeah.
You have him literally standing aside while Shannon is going to shoot Locke. And then 2 episodes later, they're kind of interacting with Locke perfectly fine and sort of going out, getting some dynamite and all the other bits and pieces. So I think it's that sort of leap between the extremes and sort of going back to, I could, if he'd sort of then formed a complete irrational hatred of Locke from that point forward, and that was expressed, go on, it would maybe fit better, but it's that.
I mean, we do, not necessarily a hatred, but by the end, it's made clear that Jack does not trust. Locke, and thinks, Locke is going to be an issue moving forwards. But yeah, I mean, I can understand like thinking that kind of reaction does seem a bit extreme. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the last person we have to talk about is our man of faith.
Yep. Favorite character. Everyone likes Locke.
He's very much the character that most people will remember.
Yeah, and he serves his role well, I think, in terms of how he's portrayed. The stuff you learn about his past, I think, is really interesting. Like they're clearly like the fact that you've had these such huge reveals about his past, in that he's actually he's been crippled for a number of years. He's had he's had this dad who tricked him into stealing the kidney out of him. You had these huge, like, momentous life moments.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, you're like, I literally know nothing about his past.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate man of mystery in terms of like, because you're like, but he was just working at a cardboard box company or like in a toy store. It's like,
but he's like this crazy badass guy.
Yeah, it's like.
I think the thing that interests me with him in this season is the shift you get, because he's first introduced and he is the figure of mystery, and everybody's kind of a bit wary of him because he's strange and he has like all the knives. And then he then moves into this kind of mentor type figure for a lot of the other characters. But as the season goes on, Locke himself gets more and more kind of obsessed with the island, and in particular, that gets then focused on the hatch, and he kind of shifts into something that is much more dangerous. Like he's clearly,
Yeah, and I think that I guess how I describe it is it's not intrinsically dangerous, but he has completely different motivations and goals to the rest of the group. That's I think the key thing. And when you had him as, oh, he's a bit of a badass, dangerous type, but his goals and objectives are aligned with the group, therefore he's incredibly useful as a mentor, as someone doing all these bits and pieces. As soon as those goals and objectives shift to something that isn't necessarily in line with the group, that's immediately where you go, oh, yeah, this is dangerous because we could be going.
and I think that the kind of chilling moment is the bit where he talks about Boone being a sacrifice that the island requested.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, and you've seen him get really upset over the death of Boone, but then he's kind of reached this point where he's kind of reasoned with it in his head, and he's decided,
yeah,
like he wasn't at fault. It's what the island wanted, which I think is the bit that to me makes him seem.
Well, it's the. Yeah, you could see him as almost like the priest-like character in the island, in that he's sort of got he's looking for the signs, he's teaching people what he believes is his belief in the island. I think like the rationale about Boone was like a really interesting thing, because that whole episode and how it ended with him being effectively tested by the island, losing his ability to walk, then being utterly distraught by the end of it because A, Boone's died, B, they haven't got anywhere near opening up the hatch, all the other bits and pieces associated with that. And then you just get, oh, there's a light in the hatch.
Yeah.
Immediately you've got, this is what it was all about. I've seen a sign. It is literally a light that has come alive. And
yeah, rather than a shaft of light from God coming down, it's one coming.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he's a fascinating character, and like as I say, even though you've learned so much about him, you've learned absolutely nothing about him in terms of the It's like your loading bar is at 1% in terms of knowledge, in terms of what's going on.
Yeah, because you kind of see him as this. You get him in the flashbacks as a quite meek character, and then suddenly he's become, the furthest thing from meek possible.
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of a quick run through our main
cast members, I think. Yeah.
I think the only other two kind of real characters might be worth talking a little bit about is there's Danielle.
Yep.
She's intriguing. And Ethan.
Yeah.
We don't know a lot about Ethan, but it's kind of the stuff we don't know about him that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of them I kind of view in the sort of mystery sense rather than the cast sense. So Danielle, I'll try and describe my views of Danielle in terms of like how I view her in terms of the show and the mystery, in that I've kind of got Danielle pegged as effectively the forewarning character. Like she's basically, this is what you guys are going to be like in 17 years' time.
You'll be as crazy as me.
In that, she's arrived at the island exactly the same method as they have. In that, hers was a shipwreck rather than a plane crash. But there was a bunch of them. One of them was pregnant, had baby, child stolen by the others.
Yeah,
all these things. So in my mind, Danielle is at the moment certainly less about as being a character, but more as a foreshadowing of things to come. So you kind of are asking questions. Oh, well, are they all going to get sick? Are they all going to be taken by the others? Are they all going to turn on each other? And
very much the spin on it is, well, she's saying these things, but how trustworthy is she? Because the way she's portrayed, she's clearly a bit mad at this point. So it's I think that's like you say, she's a foreshadower, but she's also like, but how true is that?
She's interesting in that, like we at the moment on the island, we've got the survivors of 815 that we know about. We think that we're probably going to, thanks to Michelle Rodriguez turned up, that we're going to encounter some kind of other group of them shortly, probably in season 2. Some tail section survivors seem likely at this point. We've got the others, which we don't know very much about, but we know there was Ethan, we know there was the people on the boat, and so on. And she's kind of this little agent on her own, which I think is, an important factor. But yeah, I mean, intrinsically, and I think it's again down to the fact that the actress they portrayed her, I know of from Babylon 5, I intrinsically lean towards sort of trust in her.
Right, yeah.
Because of that. So I'm definitely mindful to sort of believe that the stuff she talks about people turning on each other because of and having some kind of sickness on the island or things like that, are probably going to be things that we're going to see sometime in the future.
I mean, the one, it has happened already a little bit, but the one thing I would sort of suggest looking out for Danielle when she talks about things is her versions of events does change between different times that she tells it, which is an interesting kind of thing they play with in the show, because some of it is kind of like, oh, should you trust her? And some of it is like, is the story just changing because she's like, obviously she's got like PTSD or something.
She's been on her own for, well, we're not 100% sure how long she's been on her own, but it's implied it's at least a reasonable long. It's not all of the 17 years, but it's a big chunk of it, we think.
It's like at least a decade by the sounds of it. And the other, like I said, the other memorable person who gets named is Ethan.
Is Ethan.
Because he's barely in it, but he makes his impact.
Yep. And again, he sort of serves as these others are clearly dangerous, because he sort of, he almost shows sort of superhuman abilities at various points, which you kind of, he's actually superhuman, or is it he's just incredibly competent?
Because I think in the episodes where he's in it, you're like, he appears superhuman. Definitely in a couple of things that you actually see him do, he looks super strong.
Because he like lifts people like one-handed and things like this.
But I think some of the other stuff later on, you kind of think, oh, was he being helped by some of the others?
Right, yeah.
Like, in terms of like dragging
like Claire
and Charlie away.
I think in a similar way that Danielle is a sort of largely there in my mind as a sort of foreshadowing thing, I think Ethan has largely been effectively a sort of small warning about the others, in that this is just one, and there's clearly lots of others out there, or at least a few of them. These are dangerous because this one person has been dangerous. So I think that's his main stick, is to sort of give a bit more realism, or a bit more realization about the threat.
A bit more kind of immediacy. Because we've had it kind of hinted at before then, and then Sunday we have it. So this is probably a good time to move on to some of the ongoing mysteries that we haven't had answers to.
Okay.
See if we can put you on the spot for any of them.
Okay.
Any predictions? So I mean, spinning off from Ethan, we've got the others, and kind of the two questions there is why do we think they want Walt, and why was it they were interested in Claire?
I mean, so the only thing that I can really take from the others so far is I feel that there's definitely a link to kids. I mean, we know this from, like, Danielle says that Alex got kidnapped by them. Claire got kidnapped by them, and the only sort of, as we discussed earlier, Claire is basically defined by being the pregnant one. So, that's the only real bit about that. The fact that they come and take Walt is intriguing, because Walt, we know, is sort of special, and potentially, so therefore, is the choice to do with that. And then you sort of go back and think about Claire a bit more, and think about, well, the whole thing about the fortune teller was that he was convinced that her child was special in some way, and that she needed to raise him or to avoid this big calamity. So you therefore kind of go, okay, well, is there maybe something going on in terms of, have the others somehow been bringing these specific people to the island that have this ability, and like maybe that's what the point of Claire, that her child will develop similar Waltz type abilities. And then you ask the question, well, did Alex have these kind of abilities or ability to do that? So that's the kind of only real bits and pieces that I can really come up with in terms of what their motivations are, because they seem, they're not opposed to killing people, but they're not. Then they're also kind of reluctant to do it, in that they're not just going, oh yeah, we'll just waste all these people and do it. They clearly have held back what they're doing. I mean, Ethan does that very specifically. It's like, stop doing this, or I will kill someone. And so they're not necessarily like completely evil in terms of that sort of side.
They're not like marching out to wipe them out.
But they clearly have motivations. Clearly have resources in at least a boat. But at the moment, I think it's very difficult to see what their ball game might be, apart from possibly weirdo kids. We do have that. There was that like flashback, wasn't there? Of was it a flashback or was it a dream of Claire thinking she was getting injected in the baby area?
Oh, that is.
Was that just her hallucination, or
that was made unclear whether that was something she hallucinated or not? Or was it possibly connected with her dream?
Can't really remember if there's something like that, but at the moment they're clearly after kids in my mind. I'm wondering if it's special kids, and therefore I'm also wondering, are they somehow behind how causing the crash, causing Danielle to shipwreck? Have they got? Are they somehow responsible for that aspect to it? But there's nothing really to sort of say other than, that's an intriguing question. That because otherwise, how would they be getting their special kids if that's what they're interested in? Because they need people to come to this island that no one can seemingly find in order to do that.
Because we still have that. We still have the core question of what caused the crash and why the flight was something like 1,000 miles off. Of course.
And that's definitely one of the big mysteries. And back when we talked about the sort of, I think it was the pilot episode, I sort of tried to sort of logically say, okay, right, well, if they've flown from Sydney to this and then they've turned around, so they must be in this sort of neck of the woods. But now we've seen various bits and pieces, and I think I talked about it on our last.
Yes, because we know the Black Rock is from like Africa.
Yeah, and we've got the Nigerian
plane
and all this sort of thing going on. And so there's a bit of me that's kind of thinking the association with something like the Bermuda Triangle, that what we've seen is various things crash on the island. We haven't seen anything in the way of like a port or people going back and forth. It's sort of stated when they're on the raft that as they're going away, it's like, oh my god, it's so big. How on earth can something so big not have been found by anything?
Yes, and we've got the one of the moments that's possibly like easy to forget is we have the bits where Saeed has the I think it's Locke's compass, and he's looking at it, and it's just wrong.
Weird things, and you had the weirdness about the tides sort of switching massively. So there's a bit of me that thinks that okay, maybe it's like, I don't know. I keep going back to like the Bermuda Triangle, that things just disappear and end up possibly on this island because it's but where the island physically is, maybe it's sort of a there's something weird going on about that.
And then that kind of takes us on to like other strange things about the island, like as we've talked about briefly before. Like the weather seems quite odd. Like yes, it's kind of tropical island weather, but sometimes it just seems a bit too. Like it will start absolutely chucking it down out of nowhere. And it will just stop instantly. The weather seems a bit odd. We had, of course, the polar bear. Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, the polar bear. That's it. You've had things that have clearly arrived on the island at some point that just don't make sense to have come from all the same area, and that's why it's sort of kind of wondering, okay, is the island in a, like, I don't know, moves around or in some kind of other plane of existence, or there's lots of different possibilities about it being not in a generally regarded physical location that sort of eating away in my mind. Particularly, I think that was particularly spurned by the Nigerian plane and the Black Rock realization. It's like, well, how the hell has this gotten this far inland, and it's clearly crashed here, and everything we've seen as a result is being stuff crashing. So it's kind of like, is it like, oh, you go into the Bermuda Triangle and then you end up on this island type scenario?
Yeah, and then I mean, we have, I guess, similar to that, we've got the bodies that they found in the caves that they nicknamed Adam and Eve. It's like,
we don't know where they've come from. Are they? Yeah, but they were sort of 50 years ago or something old or something. There was a sort of date put to them.
And they had the white and black stones in their pockets, which was something that's kind of heavily used in the first half of the season, but they kind of then back off a little bit from it in the second half. You also with the island have the cable that Saeed finds that runs into the sea. We don't know where that goes.
That the cable is a big mystery, because I mean, we've seen the others, and presumably the others must live somewhere. I kind of think that there's got to be something. There has to be more infrastructure on the island than we've properly seen. So the other bit of infrastructure that's been mentioned is the radio tower. We haven't seen the radio tower yet, which is where the numbers came from. And so in my mind, I feel that I don't know if it's going to be a separate group to the others or if it's going to be linked to the others, but there's the hatch, the cable, and the radio tower, which in my mind seem all linked to the numbers in some way, shape, or form. Because chances are that my guess is that the cable, if you follow the cable, you'll probably get to the radio tower, because that radio tower has been running for however long, sending the message out and that sort of thing. It's clearly not, the radio tower is clearly not the hatch, because Danielle didn't know about the hatch. But those bits in my head are probably, my guess is they're probably linked in some way, and therefore there's probably some kind of, I don't know, power station, power supply somewhere else as well that is sort of all linking these bits and pieces. Those bits are sort of, I've lumped into one thing, but are a kind of separate mystery in my head, and I kind of wonder if there's a fourth group that used to be on the island. I don't know if they're still there. I guess we saw the light come on in the hatch, which suggests there's some kind of life going on there.
I mean, the hatch is obviously a big mystery, kind of going into the second season. So you have the question of, like, why did the light come on? Who turned the light on, or is it an automatic thing? Once there's the question of why was there no way to open it from?
I mean, I'll try for a prediction in terms of my thought process on the hatch is that what the hatch reminds me of, and it might be just I've been playing far too much Fallout games, is that it reminds me of like a nuclear fallout shelter. That's the kind of thing that it sort of reminds me of. And that those are the sort of things where you have the ability to open it is on the inside, because you go in, block it, and you don't want anyone opening it from the outside, was my sort of take on that. And it's got the sort of, the mechanics of it look like that. It's big steel reinforced. It's going down, which is exactly what you want for like a nuclear radiation protection. You want it deep under the ground. So my sort of take on it is that linked to the radio tower, linked to the power, is maybe there's going to be some kind of vault dwellers, which might be the fourth group, that are like hiding out from something that nuclear testing or something that's going on. I don't know, but that was my sort of.
And the other kind of question we got connected to the hatch, because it played into the cliffhanger, is why is the ladder broken off?
Okay. I haven't really thought about that to some extent, because that's literally like the last shot of the show, and you sort of see it's broken. Could it have been maybe the dynamite broke it? Maybe it was, I don't know.
You see how they throw things in. You don't necessarily
Yeah.
think about them all. Like,
No, I certainly hadn't really put any thought whatsoever into the why the ladder might be broken, because that would. Ooh, okay. So if we take my there was a Fallout vault that did something similar to this, where they had like an internal war within their vault, and they basically, because some people wanted to leave the vault and other people didn't, and so if you wanted to stop people leaving the vault, you would obviously destroy the ladder. Maybe it's something along those lines, like people in their vault but have been prevented from leaving by other people in the vault, and that's why the ladder's gone.
yeah, this is where the whole series turns out to be like a Fallout related. Yeah, I mean, other couple of the other quick thing connected with the island is the Whispers. We don't really know.
So the Whispers, in my head, I've associated them with the monster. I realise that they're clearly not quite the same thing, but I've sort of lumped in my mind those two elements together because, generally speaking, we've heard the Whispers and then come across the monster. It's not always been the case, but
yeah, and kind of following off from that as well, you've got like Jax seeing his dad. Like,
yeah,
it's kind of implied that might just have been like an hallucination on Jack's part from exhaustion or whatever, but it's still kind of hinted at that it's not that it is something else.
Has anyone else seen anyone? I'm just trying. Is it just Jack and his dad? I don't think we've had anyone.
The only kind of thing we have similar is Boone kind of hallucinating.
Oh, you have Boone, Boone. But although that we were
a bunch of stuff when he'd been drugged.
Yeah,
but you've got the element of him being drugged, so we don't think we've had anybody else see
any actual people.
In the same way.
Yeah. So I guess I think at the time I was definitely of the mindset that there was more to it than being a hallucination because it led them somewhere. And actually, in that scenario, the comparison is to the stuff that Locke dreamed. So Locke basically saw a bunch of stuff in his dream, which led him to the plane.
Yes, I was going to say the other one that's very similar is the moth with the cave in.
Yeah,
people talk about the idea of the moth has been brought up before that, and then you actually have a moth to lead them out.
So yeah, there might be something supernaturally going on there. It's interesting, like following the last episode, I'm less inclined to believe that the monster is necessarily something supernatural. And I think that's all down to like the sound effects that are used and the fact that it's got described as a security system. And therefore I'm wondering if maybe that's somehow linked to my vault tower
vault idea.
Yeah, that's going on there. I think, rather than linked to the sort of supernaturally bits and pieces.
Yeah, I guess you've still got questions around the exact nature of the monster. And like you say, in particular, the noises it makes, and I think the form of it, because in the finale we finally get a clear
and you sort of see it as this
just a kind of a cloud. And we briefly kind of mentioned it earlier on, is like we have the question around why are people on the flight, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit in each episode as we kind of get shown the reasons why people have ended up on that flight. And for some of them it's a choice they've made, but for other people it's a choice that somebody else has made for them. So there's a kind of a question around, is there something, I guess, like supernatural, like driving
all of them to
on to be on this plane? And then if you kind of think yes, the question then is, well, why these people?
And virtually all of them, even the ones who do something to, even the ones where there's a final moment where they make a decision that puts them on the flight rather than another flight, in virtually every circumstances, there's been some kind of outside actor that's put them in Australia
Yeah.
in the first place. So even the ones that we sort of down as, oh, they've made that choice and that's resulted in this happening. The fact that they're in a position to make that choice is almost invariably but caused by someone else. So, with Saeed, he was in London. He was going. He had no plans to go to Australia, and he's like, "Nope, CIA, come along, off you go and do this." With Sawyer, it's like being completely manipulated by this guy. That, oh yeah, you need to go and kill this dude. Go over there. For Jack, it's his dad dying in mysterious circumstances, and he's forced by his mum to go over there. Even the ones where there is a choice, there is clearly other actors involved in it. I think the only ones I can think of that. So Hurley, he was entirely at his own direction.
Yes, but it's a direction that's being driven by
the numbers.
Yeah. And I mentioned it the other week. The interesting thing for me about Hurley is we have that kind of largely comedic sequence of really bad luck as he's trying to get his flight. But 8:15 is the flight that he makes.
Yeah.
He still gets on that flight. But yeah, everybody else has kind of had, like you say, not 100% influence on whether they're on that plane or not. That's the other big mystery, isn't it, that we've got so far is the numbers. Any thoughts on the numbers and what they might mean?
No. The numbers are. I was trying to think about this last night. I was like, Gooder's going to ask me about the numbers. Like, no, I've got like no. Like, I guess the only thing that we've seen that sort of points me in some direction, but I don't know where it is that the numbers are on the hatch.
Yeah.
So if there is this fourth group of some description that is associated with the hatch, the cable, the thingy tower, then that's the group that has something to do with the numbers. But whether or not what the numbers mean, whether or not the numbers themselves are like an explanation for something, or if the numbers themselves are intrinsically have this power. In terms of the references, it's got 42 as one of the numbers, which of course is an answer to the life, the universe, and everything from Hitchhiker's Guide. But so therefore, are these numbers the bigger answer to something else?
I think, I wouldn't focus on that too much. I think Lost is smarter than Ready Player One.
Yeah, so it's like I don't feel there's enough going on there, but I feel that what I would hope is that once we get into the hatch in season 2, that's where we're going to find something. That's where I presume that we'll find the connection back to the island. And again, that's why I think I can't remember if I mentioned this already or not, why I think that the radio tower, which is transmitting the numbers originally, and the hatch, which has the numbers written on them, must be linked. And that's why I think there's this other thing that's done infrastructure going on. The power of the numbers, I have no idea what's causing that, but I feel that we're going to find out more when we get in the hatch. So given I think there's going to be some kind of like fallout shelter, I don't know what that's like, but
yeah. And I think that covers like the main mysteries we've still got to play, because we've had a few kind of character mysteries, but a lot of those have actually been kind of answered for us.
Yeah. I mean, the outstanding character mysteries are how did Locke actually lose his ability to walk? Because we haven't seen that.
Yes.
yet.
And I guess that plays into the other mysteries is why is he walking again?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, whether or not that's linked. And it'd be intriguing to know how he's such a badass, but we've sort of seen the start of that, so there's not a huge mystery there. There's what did Kate actually do?
Yeah.
And I think I sort of came up with my theory, which I'm sticking with, that she probably killed her dad in some way, because there's so many daddy issues in Lost, and this seems like the obvious thing there. But that's
we still got a little bit of a mystery around her husband, because we know she's married, but we also know that her husband wasn't the man that she loved.
Yeah.
Those are different people.
Yeah. Any other major character mysteries?
Well, I guess we talked about it earlier, but there's Walt's whatever was going on with Walt.
There's Walt's abilities, and whether or not that ties into something larger.
Why we mentioned it earlier as well. Why did Hurley end up being committed to an institution?
Yep.
I guess to some extent, there's the kind of the question around why did the tarot reader, fortune teller, what was he talking about in terms of Claire?
Yeah.
I think those are the main, kind of mystery questions we've got about tarot.
Yeah.
There are still elements of people's backstory that we haven't had filled in.
Yeah, there's a ton of backstory and other bits and pieces, but there's nothing.
Because we know Jack was married and he's not married now, but I wouldn't call that a mystery. It's just kind of backstory we've not had, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Wonder if.
I guess the other one I could think of is.
So it's interesting, like just talking about it. It's like now I immediately because we know Jack was married and for a period of time. I wonder if Jack has had a kid. Kind of wonder if what was her name? I've forgotten. Jack's Sarah. Was it Sarah?
I think Sarah.
Yeah.
Just
Claire Dane or whatever. Claire Dane? No, Claire Dane. Actress from Modern Family, anyway.
Yeah. She's Claire in Modern Family, isn't she?
She's Claire in Modern Family, not Claire Dane, who's a completely different blonde actress. So, I don't know why I just thought of that, but I was like, there's been all these daddy issues. I wonder if they split up and she's gone away with the kid like Thingy did with Walt. And
I was going to say the other kind of character mystery I think I would call a mystery is still kind of a little bit with the watch that Jin had that he's now happy for Michael to have. It's so much importance was placed on that clearly because of Sun's father telling him to deliver it.
Yep.
Who was he delivering it to? I think is the question. And
and given Lost's propensity to sort of have character links, like could he be delivering it to someone that we know of in the US?
But I think those are the main. I don't think there are any big mysteries around individual characters apart from those ones.
Any final predictions you're going to force me to try and make and fail utterly?
I don't think you've got. I mean, your main prediction here is kind of about the Fallout shelter.
Yeah, and the fact that they're all linked to the numbers in some way and whatever that. That's what I think. I will give another prediction that Michelle Rodriguez is turning up season 2.
Like we discussed,
of another group of survivors.
Very unlikely that Ana Lucia will be played by a recognizable actress if she's going to reappear.
So I feel that's a reasonable prediction. It'd be interesting to see what they do with the secondary group if that's what they're going to do, because you could very easily do some interesting things with having a group where maybe things haven't gone as well or something, or maybe they've had. I guess the obvious thing to do would be have them experience some of the stuff that Danielle's been hinting at. Like that would probably be a way of doing it if they're a smaller group and like maybe they fought among themselves or something. That's
maybe they've seen like our survivors light a signal fire on the beach and they've been like, oh, somebody's lighting a signal fire on the beach.
Yeah, they're going to kill us. They've had all their kids stolen.
Maybe they're 100% Australian, apart from Ana Lucia, because there must have been other Australians on this flight from Sydney. You'd have thought. I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, I assume you're still enjoying it because I know you've been eager to start on to.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely start on season 2, even though we'll have a break for a period of time. I'll try and restrain from going too far.
But no, that's good. Yeah, so you're happy to continue.
Yep.
Getting lost and hopefully being less lost.
Getting less lost. Going to finally find out what's in this damn hatch. That's the.
I think that's probably a good point to leave it. Let's find out what's in the damn hatch. Please do leave a comment below if you want to join in with our discussions. Like, we'll encourage you to join along with us. And we'll catch you next time.